for inviting me to share my story with you this very special Mother's Day. My name is Antoinette Brown Blackwell. I was born in the little town of Henrietta, New York, near the city of Rochester, New York, in the year 1825. I was the seventh of 10 children. When I was 6 years old, my father took our family into Rochester to hear the evangelist Charles Finney. He was speaking there every night for a whole week. And my father was greatly affected by what he heard from Charles Finney. Soon after, our family joined the Congregational Church in Henrietta, which was near our home. Now, we were known as a liberal congregational church because we believed in a God of mercy and forgiveness, not the God of wrath and judgment of some of our New England ancestors. And so, when I was 9 years old, one morning I came forward when people were invited to come forward if they wished to join the church. Now, some thought I was way too young, but the majority voted to allow me to join the church. And so if you visit that church in Henrietta, New York today, and look at their membership book, you will see where I signed that book when I was 9 years old. When I was 15 years old, I graduated from Monroe Academy. The next year, I was invited to a neighboring community to teach the children. Now, some thought that I would be a wonderful minister's wife because of my interest in spiritual matters. But I had a dream. I wanted to go to college. But those were difficult years for our family. My mother took ill, worn out from childbearing, and 2 of my siblings died from tuberculosis. So I remained living at home, helping to care for the family. But finally, when I was 21 years old, I was accepted into Oberlin College. Now, women were not allowed into the degree program in Oberlin during that time. So we had to earn what was called a literary certificate. And we studied history and art and poetry, and it was deemed that we were not capable of doing the more rigorous subjects of math and science. So at the end of my 4 years of study, I had my certificate in hand, but I had yet another dream. You see, when we were in our certificate program, ladies were not allowed to speak in class because it was seen as unseemly for young women to speak in public. So my very good friend, Lucy Stone, and I, along with several other women, started what we called the Ladies' Literary Society. We gathered in secret on our own to practice our skills of oration on each other. Now, we had to meet in secret because we did not want to draw the attention of the faculty wives who did not like these uppity, advanced women wanting to speak in public. But I wanted theological education. So I went to the head of the theology department in Oberlin, none other than the same Charles Finney that had had such an influence on our family when I was a child. Now, after much discussion with Professor Finney, he allowed that I could be a special graduate student in the theology department. But after several weeks, it occurred to me there was still a problem for me. I could not speak in class. So once again, I went back to Professor Finney and begged him to be allowed to speak in class. And finally, he agreed that I could speak in his class, but that every professor would have to make up his own mind about whether I could speak in their class. So I finished my theological training. However, I did not receive a degree. But I returned home to my family home in Henrietta, New York, and I had decided to try to make my living on the lecture circuit, which was a difficult path for a young woman. My friend Lucy Stone invited me to participate in the first Women's Rights Convention. It was here that I met Susan B. Anthony, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, and Lucretia Mott, all of whom became my lifelong friends. At that convention, I spoke refuting the biblical passages that said that women should not speak in public. I was speaking to an appreciative audience. But once again, I continued my work on the lecture circuit. And one day, after a talk in the little town of South Butler, New York, near Syracuse, along the Erie Canal, some people from the Congregational Church came to me and asked me to be their pastor. They offered me a salary of $300 a year. And after some consideration, I accepted their offer. And so I moved to South Butler and became pastor of a church. Another of my dreams fulfilled. Now, the congregation was pleased with my work, and they decided that I should be ordained. Now, some wanted it to be a very secret, not anything known outside of the church. But I insisted if we were going to do this, it must be public and legal. So, on September 15th, 1853, I was ordained in the South Butler Congregational Church. Now that day, there was a horrendous rainstorm while we were in the church with the ceremony. And during the ceremony, Elizabeth Cady Stanton's cousin, Garrett Smith, who was an elected congressman, he passed me this note. Now, I've kept it all these years, and I would like to share it with you this morning. Here's what he wrote. That pouring rain doth make it clear that silly woman must not teach. When will you learn, my sister dear, that noble man alone should preach? So now Miss Brown just stay at home, sew and cook, and then some nice young man will come, and on you cast a loving look. Now, he was teasing me. After that, I performed a wedding, which was a first for a woman. And as we moved into the winter of the following year, 2 incidents happened in the congregation which caused me to have a spiritual crisis. One instance happened when a young girl, about 4 years old, died suddenly from croup. Now, the congregation wanted me to preach that was God's retribution for the mother having given birth to this child out of wedlock. But I could not do that. And a few months later, a young man in our congregation was very ill and was dying. Now, his parents came to me and told me in no uncertain terms they wanted me to go and preach to him as if holding him over the fires of eternal hell and damnation if he did not have a conversion on his deathbed. Once again, I could not do that. That was not the God I had learned. Listening to my grandmother tell us stories from the Bible of a loving and merciful God. My spiritual crisis deepened. It got to the point where I was really questioning everything. Was there a God? Was I even the same person who was ordained some 9 months ago? I felt very alone because there was no one I could talk to. It would be a full 10 years before another woman was ordained. And finally, my internal crisis overtook my health. And I had to leave my position as pastor of the South Butler Congregational Church. I returned home to rest and to recuperate, and after a few months of recuperation, once more I decided I was ready to go back on the lecture circuit. My friend Horace Greedy invited me to New York City to work, and I joined him there working in the slums of New York, being very distressed by the poverty experienced there, especially among the women. During this time, I also made other friends. I became acquainted with the Blackwell family. Perhaps you've heard of them. Elizabeth was the first doctor, and her sister Emily was also a doctor, and several brothers, in fact, the whole family, were staunch abolitionists before there was even a public discussion about slavery. Now, Samuel Blackwell became my friend. And finally, Samuel proposed to me. Well, I had never thought of marrying because I could not imagine anybody putting up with me. Besides, women could not keep their own wages. Women could not sign a contract. Women could not own property. Why would any woman want to get married? But Samuel was persistent. And so, in a simple ceremony in my mother and father's home, we were married. Now, Samuel and I had 6 daughters. 2 of them died in infancy. In those early years, when the children were small and I was at home, I did a great deal of study and writing about the relationship of religion and science. I published 5 books during that time. But I really felt women had an obligation to participate in the public life. And so Samuel quit his job as an accountant to stay home and sell real estate from home so that he could take over the major childcare responsibilities as I went back out on the lecture circuit. Now, during those years, we were working to acquire the right for women to vote. And so we spoke in many different places. But our plans got put on a side burner when our country went to war in Europe. Now, those years also began to bring loss into my life. My good friend Susan B. Anthony died. Elizabeth Cady Stanton died. And my beloved Samuel died. And I went to New Jersey to live with my daughter Agnes. Now finally, in the year 1920, in August of that year, the amendment allowing women to vote was ratified. And so on November 4th of that year, 1920, my daughter Agnes drove me to our polling place in her automobile. Now, she thought perhaps I would tire while waiting in line. After all, I was 95 years old. So she took along a stool for me to sit if I needed to rest. But when we entered that polling place, the line saw me coming. They stepped aside, ushered me forward, where I proudly cast my vote for Warren G. Harding, because he had supported the right of women to vote. I was the only one of that original Women's Rights Convention who lived to be able to cast a vote that time. Now, my eyes grow dim, my body grows frail. I have had several dreams in my life come true. And now it is time for you, and for all of you, and for those young people sitting in the back. Pursue your dreams. Don't let hurdles stand in your way. Work for a way through them or a way around them. And I say now to you, thank you for allowing me to share this day.